On November 14, 1987, Dr. Ellen Southwick completed her final therapy session at Braeburn College. She locked her office door at 4:47 p.m., walked to her Volvo in the faculty lot, and drove toward her home in Millbrook. At 5:23 p.m., her car was found idling at a railroad crossing on County Road 9, driver's door open, engine running. State police ruled it a voluntary disappearance. Case closed in 11 days. But they never explained why her briefcase was still in the office, why the reel-to-reel recorder on her desk was still running, tape exhausted, recording nothing but the hum of an empty room, or why 3 of her former patients had died in the previous 18 months, 2 by suicide, 1 in a single-car accident on the same stretch of County Road 9. Dr. Ruth Alderman had spent 31 years in the psychology department at Braeburn, the last 8 as chair. She'd outlasted 3 deans, 2 presidents, and 1 accreditation crisis. Now she sat in her office on the 3rd floor of Whitman Hall, surrounded by filing cabinets that held 4 decades of departmental history. The letter from Ellen Southwick's sister had arrived 3 days ago. The woman wanted answers. She wanted someone to review Ellen's clinical files, her session recordings, her patient notes. Ruth had considered throwing the letter away. Instead, she'd made a phone call to a former student, someone who'd left academia for investigative work, someone who owed her a favor, someone who wouldn't ask questions she couldn't answer.
You'll have access to her office, the files, the recordings, everything she left behind.
She paused, adjusting her reading glasses.
I need to know what Ellen found, and I need to know before the board meeting in December.
Catherine Vance arrived at Braeburn on a Tuesday morning in late November. She'd graduated from the college 15 years earlier, spent a decade in clinical practice, then pivoted to consulting work. Insurance investigations, disability claims, the occasional wrongful death case. Ruth Alderman had been her thesis advisor. The debt between them was complicated. Catherine parked in the visitor lot and walked across the quad, past students in wool coats hurrying between classes. The campus looked smaller than she remembered. Whitman Hall still smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. Ellen Southwick's office was on the 2nd floor, door locked, yellow police tape peeled back at one corner. Ruth had left the key under the department secretary's blotter. Catherine turned the key and stepped inside. The office was frozen in time. November 14th, preserved in amber. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the desk, mold floating on the surface. The reel-to-reel recorder hunched beside it like a patient animal. The office told a story. Ellen Southwick had been organized, patient files alphabetized in the cabinet, session tapes labeled and dated on the shelf, appointment book open on the desk. Catherine photographed everything before touching anything. The appointment book showed a full schedule on November 14th. 9 a.m., 10:30, 1 p.m., 3 p.m. 4 patients. The 3 p.m. slot had a name crossed out and rewritten. Brennan, T. Below it, in different ink, see tape 47. Catherine found tape 47 in the cabinet. The label read, TB, Session 12, November 7, 1987. 7 days before Ellen disappeared. She threaded it onto the reel-to-reel, found the power switch, and pressed play. Static. Then Ellen's voice, calm and professional. This is Session 12 with patient TB, November 7th, 1987. The patient has requested we discuss the events of September 1985. A long pause on the tape. Then a young man's voice, barely audible. Thomas, I remember the room. I remember the lights. The tape ran for 47 minutes. Catherine listened twice, taking notes in a legal pad. The patient, Thomas Brennan, described something that had happened 2 years earlier when he was a sophomore. A research study. A room in the basement of Whitman Hall. lights and sounds designed to induce specific emotional states. At first, his account was fragmented, sensory details without context, the smell of antiseptic, a chair that reclined, someone's hand on his shoulder. Dr. Keene said it would help with my anxiety. That's why I signed up. The study was supposed to help. What happened in the study, Thomas? I don't. The sessions blur together. But there was one night, late. Everyone else had gone home. His voice dropped. Catherine leaned closer to the speaker. Thomas, he gave me something. A drink. After that, I couldn't move. But I could feel everything. Catherine found Thomas Brennan's name in the patient files. He'd been seeing Ellen Southwick since September 1987, referred by the campus health center after a suicide attempt. The intake form listed his previous treatment. Research participation, Keene study, fall 1985. Patient reports adverse reaction, see attached. But there was no attachment. Catherine checked the file 3 times. The staple holes were visible in the corner of the intake form. Something had been removed. She pulled the campus directory from Ellen's shelf and looked up the psychology department faculty. Dr. Harold Keene, professor of clinical psychology, director of the Behavioral Research Laboratory. His office was 1 floor up. Catherine closed the file and stood at the window, watching students cross the quad in the fading light. The Behavioral Research Laboratory. She'd never heard of it. In 4 years as an undergraduate, 3 as a graduate student, she'd never once heard that name. The department secretary was a woman named Dolores Finch, who'd held the position since 1962. She sat behind a metal desk in the anteroom, guarding access to the faculty offices with the territorial vigilance of a border collie. Catherine introduced herself as a consultant working for Dr. Alderman.
The Southwick matter. Yes, Ruth mentioned you might come by.
Her voice was flat. Careful.
I'm trying to understand Ellen's caseload. Some of her patients were referred from a research study. The Keene study?
Dolores's fingers stopped moving on her typewriter.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
The Behavioral Research Laboratory. It's listed in the faculty directory.
Dr. Keene handles his own scheduling, his own files. Always has.
She resumed typing, each keystroke deliberate.
If you want to know about Dr. Keene's work, I suggest you ask Dr. Keene.
Dr. Harold Keene's office was on the 3rd floor, corner position, twice the size of Ellen Southwick's. Catherine knocked at 4 p.m. The man who answered was in his early 60s, silver hair swept back, wearing a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. He looked like a casting director's idea of a professor. His handshake was firm. His smile didn't reach his eyes.
Dr. Alderman mentioned you'd be looking into Ellen's files. Terrible business. We're all still in shock.
You knew her well?
Colleagues for 6 years. Brilliant clinician, though her methods were unconventional.
He gestured for her to sit.
She had a tendency to pursue therapeutic avenues that weren't always scientifically grounded. Recovered memory work, hypnotic regression. The sort of thing that looks dramatic but lacks empirical support.
Some of her patients were referred from your research program.
Were they? I'd have to check the records. We've had hundreds of participants over the years.
Catherine spent the next 3 hours in the college library, feeding coins into the microfiche machine. The Behavioral Research Laboratory had been established in 1979 with a grant from the Whitfield Foundation, a private trust with ties to the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Harold Keene was listed as principal investigator. The stated purpose? Investigation of pharmacological and environmental interventions for anxiety disorders. She found 2 published papers, both in minor journals. The methodology sections were vague. Participants were exposed to controlled sensory stimuli under monitored conditions. No specifics about the drugs used. No follow-up data on outcomes. She scrolled back through the campus newspaper archives. October 1985. Psychology Department receives major research grant. February 1986. Student dies in off-campus accident. The student's name was Sarah Mitchum, Jr., psychology major. The article mentioned she'd been active in departmental research programs. No further details. Campus Health Center was a converted Victorian house at the edge of the quad. Catherine arrived at 9 a.m. the next morning and asked to speak with whoever had referred Thomas Brennan to Dr. Southwick. The receptionist made a phone call. 10 minutes later, a nurse named Patricia Doyle appeared. Mid-40s, tired eyes, coffee cup in hand.
I can't discuss specific patients.
I'm not asking about his treatment. I want to know about the referral process. When a student comes to you after participating in a research study, what's the protocol?
Patricia's grip tightened on her coffee cup.
There is no protocol. Research participants sign consent forms. If they have problems, they go back to the researcher.
What if the researcher is the problem?
Patricia looked over her shoulder at the empty hallway.
I've worked here 11 years. I've seen students come through that door who couldn't remember their own names, who couldn't sleep, who hurt themselves. And every single time, the paperwork says anxiety disorder. Every single time.
Catherine returned to Ellen's office and began cataloging the session tapes. There were 63 in total, spanning 18 months of clinical work. 24 patients. But when she cross-referenced the tapes with the patient files, the numbers didn't match. The files contained records for 31 patients. 7 files had no corresponding recordings. She checked the labels twice. The missing tapes were all from the same period, September through December 1985. The same months the Keene study was running. She found a note in Ellen's handwriting tucked inside one of the empty file folders. Original recordings moved to secure location. C.R.A. Ruth Alderman. The woman who'd hired her. The woman who'd given her access to everything in this office. Everything except, apparently, the tapes that mattered. Catherine picked up the phone on Ellen's desk and dialed the extension for the department chair's office. Ruth Alderman kept her waiting for 40 minutes. When Catherine finally entered the office, Ruth was standing at the window with her back to the door.
I wondered how long it would take you to find the gaps.
You said I'd have access to everything.
I said you'd have access to her office. I never mentioned the archive.
She turned. Her face was drawn, older than it had looked 3 days ago.
Ellen made copies of certain recordings. 7 patients who'd participated in Harold's research. She gave them to me for safekeeping in February, said she was documenting a pattern.
What kind of pattern?
I don't know. I never listened to them. I was afraid to.
She opened a desk drawer and removed a small key.
Basement storage, room B7. I'll tell the custodian to expect you. And Catherine, Harold has friends on the board. Wealthy friends. Whatever you find, be very careful who you tell.
The basement of Whitman Hall smelled like mildew and old heating pipes. Room B7 was at the end of a long corridor, past stacks of broken furniture and boxes of outdated textbooks. The lock was rusted. Catherine had to work the key for 3 minutes before it turned. Inside, a small storage room, maybe 8 by 10 feet. A metal shelf against one wall held 7 reel-to-reel tapes in cardboard sleeves. A cardboard box on the floor contained manila folders, photocopies, not originals, medical records, consent forms, incident reports. She picked up the first tape. S.M. Keene Study, Session 4, October 1985. Sarah Mitchum, the student who died. Catherine sat on an overturned crate, threaded the tape onto the portable recorder she'd brought, and pressed play. The first sound was breathing, shallow, rapid, distressed. Please, I can't do this again. You signed the consent form, Sarah. 4 more sessions. That's what you agreed to. The tape documented a session from October 11th, 1985. Dr. Keene's voice was calm throughout, clinical, detached. Sarah Mitchum sounded increasingly panicked. The intervention involved something called Protocol 7, a combination of pharmacological agents and sensory manipulation designed to restructure maladaptive anxiety responses. Keen, the medication will help you relax. Just breathe. It's too much. The room is moving. I can't. That's the medication working. Don't fight it. There was a sound on the tape, a click, like a switch being thrown. Then a low hum, rising in pitch. Sarah's breathing became ragged. Stop it. Please stop it. Another click. The hum changed frequency. Sarah began to cry. You need to trust the process, Sarah. This is for your own good. The tape ran for another 20 minutes. Catherine listened to all of it. Her hands were shaking when she stopped the recorder. The consent forms in the cardboard box told a partial story. Participants had signed documents authorizing experimental treatment for anxiety disorders and waiving their right to detailed disclosure of methodology. The forms were dense with legal language. A 20-year-old with test anxiety wouldn't have understood what they were agreeing to. Neither would Catherine if she hadn't spent 6 years reviewing insurance claims. The liability release was comprehensive. The college, the department, and Dr. Keen personally were indemnified against any adverse outcomes resulting from participation. In the margins of one form, someone, Ellen, based on the handwriting, had written, "How many signed? How many harmed? Why no IRB oversight?" IRB, Institutional Review Board. Every research study involving human subjects was supposed to go through ethics review. Catherine had seen no IRB approval documentation in any of the files. Catherine found the office of the Institutional Review Board in the administration building across campus. The coordinator was a young man named Dennis Riley, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else.
The Keen study? Let me check the index.
He disappeared into a back room for 15 minutes. When he returned, his face had changed.
There's no file, no approval documentation, no record of any submission.
A research study using human subjects ran for at least 2 years without IRB approval?
That shouldn't be possible. Every study has to be approved. It's federal law.
Unless someone ensured the paperwork never reached this office.
Dennis glanced at the door.
Look, I've only been here 8 months. The woman before me, Mrs. Haskell, she retired suddenly in January. Left no notes, no transition documents. I've been piecing things together ever since.
Do you have her contact information?
She moved to Florida. Didn't leave a forwarding address.
That evening, Catherine spread the files across the floor of her motel room and began constructing a timeline. 1979. Behavioral Research Laboratory established. 1981 to 1984. Low-level studies, small grants, unremarkable results. 1985. Major funding from Whitfield Foundation. Protocol 7 begins. September to December 1985. Peak activity. Dozens of participants. At least 7 documented adverse reactions. February 1986. Sarah Mitchum dies. The official report called it a single-car accident. Blood alcohol level 0. No mechanical failure. She simply drove off County Road 9 at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Catherine pulled out the campus newspaper article about Sarah's death. A quote from Dr. Keen. Sarah was a dedicated student who struggled with anxiety. We are deeply saddened by this loss. 3 days after that article ran, the Keen study was quietly suspended. No announcement. No explanation. The Whitfield Foundation withdrew its funding in March. Thomas Brennan lived in an off-campus apartment 3 blocks from the college. Catherine found the address in Ellen's files and knocked on his door at 10 a.m. The young man who answered looked older than 22. Dark circles under his eyes, unwashed hair. He recognized Ellen Southwick's name immediately.
She's dead, isn't she? They said she disappeared, but she's dead.
I don't know. I'm trying to find out what happened.
The same thing that happened to Sarah. The same thing that almost happened to me.
He stepped back to let her in. The apartment was small, cluttered with textbooks and unwashed dishes. He sat on the edge of an unmade bed and stared at the wall.
She was the only one who believed me. I told the health center, the dean's office, my parents. Everyone said I was confused, traumatized, making things up. But Ellen listened. She recorded everything. She said she was building a case.
Thomas spoke for 2 hours. His account was fragmented but consistent. He'd signed up for the Keene study in September 1985, believing it was a standard anxiety treatment program. The first 3 sessions were unremarkable. Questionnaires, interviews, baseline measurements. Session 4 was different.
They gave me something to drink, said it was a vitamin supplement to help me relax. After that, I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was awake. And then the lights started.
He described a room in the basement of Whitman Hall. Reclining chair. Strobe lights. Audio played through headphones. Dissonant tones that seemed to vibrate inside his skull.
I don't remember everything. The sessions blend together. But there was one night, late, after everyone else had gone. Dr. Keene said he needed to run additional tests. That's when...
He stopped. His hands were trembling.
That's when it happened. When he... I can't. I'm sorry. I can't say it.
Catherine left Thomas with her motel phone number and a promise to call if she learned anything. She drove back to campus in silence, trying to reconcile what she'd heard with the man she'd met in the 3rd floor office. Dr. Harold Keene, respected professor, published researcher, member of the college's board of advisors, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and smiled without his eyes. Back in Ellen's office, she pulled out the remaining tapes from the basement archive and began listening systematically. 7 patients, 7 stories. Each one described the same sequence: the drink, the paralysis, the lights, the sounds. And in 3 of the recordings, something more. Something that happened when Keene dismissed his research assistants and stayed alone with the subject. Ellen had been building a case, documenting a pattern of systematic abuse disguised as research. And someone had silenced her before she could take it further. The Whitfield Foundation maintained an office in Hartford. Catherine drove down the next morning and found a receptionist who was willing to talk, for the price of a long lunch at the restaurant across the street.
I wasn't supposed to keep copies, but I did. The grant termination paperwork. Something about it bothered me.
She slid a manila envelope across the table.
We funded Dr. Keene's research for 3 years. Then in February '86, the board voted to pull all support. No explanation. No review process. Just a letter saying the relationship was terminated, effective immediately.
What bothered you about it?
The vote. It was unanimous. In 15 years, I've never seen a unanimous board vote on anything. And the chairman, Mr. Whitfield himself, he was Keene's biggest supporter. Then suddenly, nothing. He won't take calls from the college. Won't acknowledge the program ever existed.
Do you have contact information for Mr. Whitfield?
He died. Heart attack. 3 months after the grant was terminated.
The documents in the envelope told a story of institutional panic. Internal memos referenced significant liability exposure and reputational risk. A draft letter, never sent, mentioned multiple credible allegations of research misconduct. Someone at the foundation had known. Someone had tried to document the problem. But the paper trail ended abruptly in February 1986. After that, silence. Catherine pulled into a rest stop on I-84 and spread the documents across her passenger seat. A name kept appearing in the memos: Dr. Robert Marsh, consultant to the Foundation's Medical Advisory Board. His signature appeared on the grant termination letter. She found his office number in the Hartford phone book and called from the rest stop payphone.
I wondered when someone would call about this.
You remember the Keene study?
I remember advising the foundation to run, not walk, away from Harold Keene. I remember being told to keep my concerns to myself. And I remember a young woman named Sarah Mitchum. I still see her face sometimes when I can't sleep.
Dr. Robert Marsh lived in a renovated farmhouse outside Farmington. He was in his 70s, retired from practice, tending a vegetable garden that had gone to seed for the winter. He invited Catherine inside and made tea while she explained why she'd come.
I reviewed the research protocols in 1985, standard consulting work. But what I saw in those documents, it wasn't research. It was experimentation. The kind of thing that got people prosecuted at Nuremberg.
Why didn't you report it?
I tried. I wrote a formal complaint to the foundation. I contacted the state medical board. I even called the FBI.
He set down his teacup.
Nothing happened. Harold Keene has powerful friends. The Whitfield family, state legislators, college trustees who donate to the right campaigns. Every door I knocked on closed in my face.
And Sarah Mitchum?
She came to see me 2 weeks before she died. She wanted to file a formal complaint. I told her I'd help. And then she drove off a road in the middle of the night.
Catherine returned to Braeburn that evening. The campus was quiet. Thanksgiving break was approaching, and most students had already left. She parked in the lot behind Whitman Hall and sat in their car, watching the lights in the third-floor windows. Keene's office was still illuminated. She could see his silhouette moving behind the glass. Her motel phone had a message waiting when she checked in. Ruth Alderman, asking her to come to the office first thing in the morning. Something about the board meeting. Something urgent. Catherine lay in bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, thinking about Sarah Mitchum and Thomas Brennan and Ellen Southwick. 3 people who'd tried to tell the truth. 1 dead, 1 damaged, 1 disappeared. And Harold Keene still moving behind his office window, untouchable. She thought about what Dr. Marsh had said. Powerful friends, closed doors, the kind of protection that doesn't show up in documents. Ruth Alderman's office door was closed when Catherine arrived at 8 a.m. She knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. Unlocked. The office was empty. Ruth's desk was cleared. The filing cabinet stood open, drawers pulled out, contents gone. The department secretary, Dolores, appeared in the doorway.
She resigned. Last night. Effective immediately.
Where did she go?
I don't know. She left this for you.
She handed Catherine a sealed envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper with Ruth's handwriting. They know about the tapes. They know you have them. Harold went to the board last night. They're calling it theft of confidential patient records. There's a warrant being prepared. Get out of there. Take everything. I'm sorry I can't do more. R. Catherine folded the note and walked calmly out of Whitman Hall. She didn't run. Running would attract attention. But her car was packed and on the highway within 15 minutes. Catherine drove to her sister's house in Providence and spent 3 days reviewing the materials she'd gathered. 7 patient tapes, copies of consent forms, the foundation documents from Hartford, her own notes from interviews with Thomas, Patricia Doyle, Dennis Riley, Dr. Marsh. It wasn't enough for a criminal case. Too many years had passed. Too many witnesses had scattered or died. But it might be enough for something else. She called a contact at the Boston Globe, an investigative reporter she'd worked with on an insurance fraud case 2 years earlier.
You're talking about a tenured professor at a respected college. Accusations of what exactly?
Research misconduct. Systematic abuse of human subjects. At least 1 death that wasn't an accident.
That's a hell of a claim.
I have documentation, recordings, witnesses willing to talk.
A long pause on the line.
Send me what you have. But Catherine, these people you're going after, they play rough.
The warrant came through 3 days later. Catherine's motel room in Braeburn was searched. Her car was impounded from her sister's driveway. The charge? theft of confidential medical records. The complaint was filed by the college's legal counsel on behalf of Dr. Harold Keene. The news made the Providence Journal. Former psychologist accused of stealing patient files. Catherine's lawyer was a woman named Joan Hennessy, who'd handled her divorce and didn't scare easily.
They're trying to bury you. Classic intimidation tactic. Make the whistleblower into the criminal. Can they make the charges stick? Depends on how they define theft. You were given access by the department chair. The tapes were copies, not originals, but they have expensive lawyers and friendly judges. It could go either way. What about the content of the tapes? What Ellen documented? That's the problem. The moment you try to use those recordings as evidence, they'll argue they were illegally obtained. Fruit of the poisonous tree.
The Boston Globe reporter called back on a Thursday afternoon. His voice was different, flat, careful.
I can't run the story.
Why not?
My editor got a call from someone high up. Someone who mentioned advertising relationships and access to college sports coverage. The paper does a lot of business with schools like Braeburn.
They're killing the story to protect ad revenue?
I'm sorry, Catherine. I believe you, but I can't help you. Not through the Globe.
She hung up and sat in her sister's kitchen, staring at the boxes of evidence she couldn't use. The tapes, the documents, the careful work Ellen Southwick had done before she disappeared. All of it worthless if no one would listen. Her sister came in from the grocery store and found her there, still staring.
There has to be another way.
There's always another way. I just haven't found it yet.
Thomas Brennan called her 3 days later. His voice was shaking.
Someone broke into my apartment. They took everything. The letters Ellen wrote me, the copies of my own session tapes, my journal from that year. Everything.
Did you call the police?
They said it looked like a routine burglary. Nothing else was taken, just the things connected to the study.
Catherine thought about the timing. The warrant, the killed story. Now this.
Thomas, listen to me. Do you still have the original consent form you signed? The one with Dr. Keene's signature?
Maybe. I think my parents kept some of my paperwork from that year. Why?
Because if we can prove he administered drugs without proper disclosure, without IRB approval, it's not just research misconduct, it's assault. And there's no statute of limitations on that.
A long silence on the line.
I'll find it. Whatever it takes.
Thomas found the consent form in his parents' attic in Worcester. Catherine drove up to collect it on a gray Saturday morning. The document was exactly what she needed. Dr. Harold Keene's signature, dated September 12, 1985, authorizing pharmacological intervention without specifying the drugs to be used. No IRB stamp, no institutional approval number, no disclosure of risks or side effects. She also found something else in the box of Thomas's papers. A photograph. 5 students in a laboratory setting, sitting in reclining chairs, electrodes attached to their heads. Thomas in the middle, eyes closed. And standing behind them, clipboard in hand, Dr. Harold Keene.
I don't remember that being taken.
You were probably sedated.
She turned the photograph over. On the back, in neat handwriting, Protocol 7, Test Group B, October 1985.
Do you recognize any of the other students?
The girl on the left. That's Sarah Mitchum.
Catherine returned to Providence and spread everything across her sister's dining room table. The tapes, the consent forms, the foundation documents, the photograph, her own notes from 2 weeks of investigation. She'd spent 12 years evaluating evidence for insurance claims. She knew how to build a case. And now, finally, she had enough pieces to see the whole picture.
Here's what happened.
Her sister sat across the table, listening.
Harold Keene ran an unauthorized research program using experimental drugs and sensory manipulation on vulnerable students. No oversight, no ethics review. When subjects had adverse reactions, he documented them as anxiety disorders and referred them to campus health. When Sarah Mitchum threatened to go public, she died in a convenient accident. Ellen Southwick spent 18 months documenting the pattern. She was building a case for the state medical board, and when Keene found out, she disappeared.
Can you prove any of this?
I can prove enough. The consent forms, the missing IRB approval, the Foundation's internal memos, the photograph, and the tapes, Ellen's recordings of victims describing what happened to them. It's not a criminal case, but it's enough to end his career.
The state medical board wouldn't touch it. Catherine spent 3 days on the phone, transferred from office to office, told to submit written complaints that disappeared into bureaucratic silence. The FBI regional office said they couldn't investigate without a formal referral from local law enforcement. The Braeburn Police Department said it was outside their jurisdiction. College matters were handled internally. Every door closed, every avenue blocked, just like Dr. Marsh had described. But Catherine had one advantage Marsh hadn't. She'd spent a decade navigating institutional resistance. She knew that official channels were designed to protect official people. If she wanted to hurt Harold Keene, she'd have to go around the system, not through it. She picked up the phone and called her lawyer.
Joan, I need you to find me a civil attorney, someone who handles personal injury cases, someone who isn't afraid to sue a college. You're thinking lawsuit. I'm thinking class action. Every victim of Protocol 7, every student Harold Keene drugged and abused, all of them, together, against the college that let it happen.
The civil attorney was a man named Paul Rizzo, from a Boston firm that specialized in medical malpractice. He reviewed Catherine's materials over 3 days and called her on a Wednesday morning.
This is explosive. If even half of what's on these tapes is true, Keene should be in prison.
The criminal justice system isn't interested.
Then we make them interested. A civil suit forces discovery. We subpoena the college's records. We depose Keene under oath. We get everything into the public record.
And the theft charges against me?
Countersue. Claim the charges are retaliatory. Make them defend their conduct while we attack theirs. It's messy, it's expensive, and it'll take years, but it can work.
Catherine thought about Ellen Southwick, wherever she was, dead or hiding or simply gone.
How many plaintiffs do we need?
3 minimum. 5 would be better. Can you find them?
I know where to start.
Catherine spent the next month tracking down former participants in the Keene study. The photograph from Thomas's attic gave her faces. College records, obtained through a sympathetic registrar who'd known Ellen, gave her names. Of the 5 students in the photograph, 2 were dead. Sarah Mitchum and a young man named Kevin Walsh, suicide in 1987. One had moved to California and wouldn't return her calls. One was in a psychiatric facility in Vermont, but the 5th was a woman named Diane Crowley, now living in Albany, working as an accountant. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop near her office.
I've been waiting 10 years for someone to ask about this.
You remember the study?
I remember everything. The drugs, the lights, the things he did when no one else was there.
Her hands shook as she lifted her coffee cup.
I tried to file a complaint in 1986. The dean's office said there was no record of any study. They made me feel like I was crazy. But I'm not crazy. I know what happened to me.
With Thomas Brennan and Diane Crowley willing to testify, Catherine had 2 plaintiffs. She needed 3. The woman in California still wouldn't talk. The man in the Vermont facility was too fragile to participate. But Ellen's files mentioned other patients, people who'd come to her later, after the study ended, struggling with symptoms they couldn't explain. One name stood out: Patricia Webb, a former graduate student who'd worked as a research assistant in Keene's lab. She'd left the program abruptly in November 1985 and transferred to another university. Catherine found her teaching at a community college in western Massachusetts.
I wasn't a subject. I was staff. I helped run the sessions.
Then you saw what happened.
Patricia was silent for a long moment.
I saw everything. I saw students strapped into chairs, drugged, unable to move while things happened. I saw Sarah Mitchum the night before she died. She was terrified.
Why didn't you report it?
Because I was 23 years old, and he said he'd destroy my career. And I believed him.
The lawsuit was filed in January 1988. Brennan v. Braeburn College. 3 plaintiffs. Allegations of negligence, failure to supervise, and institutional cover-up. The college's lawyers responded within 2 weeks, denying all claims and filing a motion to dismiss. The local newspaper picked up the story, a small item on page 6, carefully worded to avoid libel. Then Harold Keene did something unexpected. He requested a meeting. Catherine met him in a neutral location, a conference room at her lawyer's office in Boston. Keene arrived alone, dressed in the same tweed jacket he'd worn when she first met him. His smile was the same, warm on the surface, cold underneath.
You've caused quite a bit of trouble, Dr. Vance.
I'm not a doctor anymore. You're the reason I left clinical practice.
Am I? I don't believe we've met before this unfortunate business.
We haven't, but I've met your victims.
Keene leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled.
You have recordings, consent forms, a photograph, circumstantial evidence assembled by a disturbed colleague who abandoned her practice and disappeared.
Ellen Southwick didn't abandon anything. She was silenced.
Speculation, paranoid fantasy, the kind of thing that won't hold up in court.
He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city.
I've spent 30 years building a reputation. I've helped thousands of patients, and you want to destroy all of that based on the confused memories of a few troubled young people.
I want you to face consequences for what you did to them.
What I did was try to help them. The techniques were experimental, yes, but the intention was therapeutic. If some participants had adverse reactions, that's an unfortunate side effect of scientific progress.
You drugged students without their informed consent. You sexually assaulted at least 3 of them while they were paralyzed. You drove Sarah Mitchum to her death.
Keene turned from the window. For the first time, his smile was gone.
You can't prove any of that.
Catherine opened her briefcase and removed a cassette tape, a copy of one of Ellen's recordings.
This is Sarah Mitchum, October 1985. She describes exactly what you did to her. The drugs, the paralysis, your hands on her body.
She pressed play. Sarah's voice filled the room, young and terrified. He said if I told anyone, no one would believe me. He said I'd imagined it, that the drugs made me confused. Keene's face had gone pale.
There are 6 more tapes like this. 6 more victims describing the same pattern, the same man, the same room in the basement of Whitman Hall.
She stopped the recording.
You're right. A criminal case would be difficult. But a civil case only requires a preponderance of evidence. And when these tapes are played in open court, when Thomas Brennan and Diane Crowley describe what you did to them under oath, when Patricia Webb testifies about what she witnessed as your research assistant, your reputation won't survive it.
What do you want?
Resignation, surrender of your medical license, and a settlement large enough to pay for the therapy your victims will need for the rest of their lives.
The settlement was reached in March 1988. The terms were sealed by court order. Harold Keene resigned his position at Braeburn College, citing health reasons. He surrendered his license to practice psychology in Massachusetts, but retained his credentials in 2 other states. The college paid an undisclosed sum to the 3 plaintiffs. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. The tapes, the documents, the photograph, all of it was placed under seal, accessible only by special judicial order. Catherine watched from the gallery as the judge signed the final papers. Thomas Brennan sat beside her, thin and pale, clutching a check he'd never asked for.
Is it over?
For you, maybe. Not for him. He'll find another job, another institution that doesn't ask questions, another basement laboratory.
Then what was the point?
The point is, you're still here. Sarah Mitchum isn't. Kevin Walsh isn't. Ellen Southwick isn't. But you survived. You told the truth. And somewhere, in a sealed file in a courthouse basement, the truth exists.
Catherine Vance returned to Providence and resumed her consulting work. She never spoke publicly about the Southwick case. The court order prohibited disclosure of the settlement terms, and she honored it. Legally, if not spiritually, but she kept copies. the tapes, the consent forms, the photograph of 5 students in a basement laboratory, one of them dead within months, all of them damaged forever. She stored them in a safe deposit box at a bank in downtown Providence, paid the annual fee in cash, and told no one where they were. Harold Keene died in 1996, heart failure, at a private clinic in Arizona. His obituary in the Braeburn Alumni magazine called him a pioneer in anxiety research and a beloved mentor to generations of students. It did not mention Protocol 7. It did not mention Sarah Mitchum. Ellen Southwick was never found. Her car remained in evidence storage until 1992, when it was sold at auction. Her office at Braeburn was reassigned to a new faculty member in 1989. Her name appears nowhere in the college's official history, but in a courthouse basement in Boston, in a sealed file marked with a case number and a date, the tapes still exist, waiting.